Let's talk about Blender. Hello, my name is Kaze and welcome to another Right Brain tutorial. Now, more than an actual tutorial, this is an assorted random bits and pieces and thoughts and impressions, kind of stream of consciousness of me using Blender. I've been using Blender for the past couple of months. I just started a brand new project of mine. It's a sci-fi film that I want to do, and I wanted to run some tests, and I decided to do tests in Blender just to explore a little bit what the workflow of that would be and if it would fit my needs. One question that some of you guys might be asking is why Blender when I use Houdini, and Houdini is this industry standard, very powerful software. It can do just about everything, and Houdini 18.5 just got released, so that brings even more functionality and new bells and whistles to the table. Why in the world would I possibly want to look into a different DCC? And the answer to that question is very simple, and it's a one-word answer: Eevee. Now, what is Eevee? Some of you might be asking. Well, Eevee is a real-time or near real-time render engine that comes built into Blender, and it's pretty powerful and it's incredibly fast, and it was very interesting to see just how much I could push Eevee to get a realistic or at least realistic enough result from it, because the render times are so incredibly fast. Okay, so what I'm going to show you guys is two clips from this sci-fi project that I've been working on, and one of those clips was rendered in Eevee and the other clip was rendered in 3D Light. Let's take a look. Okay, so the most important thing that you need to know about these two clips is that one of them took about, I would say about 8 hours to render, which was going on at about I think around 4 or 5 minutes per frame in order to get a relatively clean result. The other clip took about 20 minutes, okay? You heard that right. Because render times in Eevee are measured in seconds and not in minutes. So, for instance, most of the times you can kind of render a frame in about 2 or 3 seconds. Sometimes you want to up your samples and quality settings, so you might be going to 6 or 7 seconds per frame. And in some extreme cases where you have a lot of geometry, a lot of complex textures, and so on and so forth, you might get into the 30 seconds per frame range, but never into the minutes per frame, because Eevee, as I said, it's real-time or near real-time render engine, so it's designed to be very fast. Now, if we pixel peep the two different examples, you will see that there are obvious differences between those two renders, and you can kind of spot, if you study the two clips back to back, you can kind of spot which one is which. And my response to that is, yeah, I mean, there are differences, and maybe there might be some arguably some realism differences between the two. The question is the difference worth hours of render time versus literally like a coffee break? So the way Eevee came about for me is because I discovered the work of this pretty famous, pretty accomplished Blender artist who also does a number of really cool tutorials that he calls lazy tutorials, because they're really quick and dirty, and he speaks really fast, and you have to kind of watch him 50 times before you can kind of figure out exactly what it is that he's doing, because he's moving so fast. I'm going to post a link in the description of the video below, but his name is Ian Hubert. And what Ian did, he's been working also on his own sci-fi project. called Dynamo Dream, and he posted what he calls like a little teaser, which is more kind of like a scene from this project of his, and I'm just gonna like show you a little bit of it. And what you need to know about this particular scene that you're watching right now is two things to keep in mind. One is that he shot this on a little green screen stage that's about the size of a garage. That is, honestly, from seeing like some of the behind the scenes images, it's fairly poorly lit and not exactly what I would call like a professional psych type of green screen stage. And the other thing that you need to know about it is that it was also rendered with Eevee. So let's dive into Blender for a little bit, and I'm going to show you around and just kind of give you a little quick tour of the house, just so you can kind of see a little bit how things are laid out in Blender and what like the basics of Blender are. Alright, so here we are in Blender. I haven't quite figured out exactly where to position myself because there's some stuff back here in the corner. I think I'm just going to park myself right here. That should be like fairly safe of a spot to have my face in. Me and my COVID hair that is like once again growing out of control. Okay, so anyway, this is Blender, and you know, it's fairly similar in many respects to what you would expect to see in, you know, any other DCC program. I mean, navigation is fairly similar to the way you would find in Houdini. If you hold down the middle mouse button, you'll be able to kind of orbit around your view, and if you hold down Shift and your middle mouse button, you can pan around, and by using the scroll wheel in your middle mouse button, you can zoom in and out. I highly recommend, even to Mac users, to figure out a way to get your hands on a middle mouse button, because or a mouse with a middle button, I guess I should say. So the way Blender works, the kind of main differences coming from Houdini, I mean, aside from the fact that you obviously don't really have a node-based workflow, for better or for worse, is the fact that instead of having this kind of network contexts like you would have in Houdini, so you would have like the OBJ context and the SOP context where you just kind of do all your modeling and scene layouts, or you might have the matte context to do all your you know, materials and shading and stuff like that. You had like the out context and so on and so forth. Well, in Blender, what you actually have is these tabs up here, okay? And of course, there's additional tabs that you can kind of add. So you have like a tab for the layout, you have a tab to do your UV editing, texture painting, shading, animation, rendering, compositing, scripting, and so on and so forth. Let's jump right into what I like the most about Blender at the moment, which is this Eevee render engine. And basically, you know, you can see like my scene right here, and all I have to do is just click on this sphere icon right here, and that's going to give me like the full Eevee render, and it's going to take just a second to calculate, and here we are, and now all of a sudden I have access to my actual scene in basically the way it's going to render in my final version, which is really cool, because now I can actually kind of work this way. I mean, I don't have to do constantly, you know, like some render stills and trying to kind of figure out if you know, if my lighting is correct, if you know, if all those different elements are correct, how they actually look on camera. With Eevee, I can do all that stuff in real time as I'm working. So let's say, for instance, I have like a point light right here that is providing my main illumination. So let's say that maybe I want to turn it a different color, make it like red. Now I can kind of see that, you know, that it's tinting all of my geometry red, or maybe I want to make it more dim, or maybe I want to make it a lot more powerful, or maybe I want to, you know, move it around and, you know, just kind of bring it like in the rear or in the front, or maybe I want to bring it like a little bit lower, change the way the shadows are, and so on and so forth. I mean, those are all things that I can do in real time, and it also like plays back in real time. I mean, you can kind of see if I hit play, I have my video playing back, and once again, this is being rendered in Eevee on the spot. Like, you know, now the settings are not like super crazy, you know, like high resolution or anything like that, but at the same time, it gives me a really, really good idea of what I am getting in my scene. And that way I can kind of make tweaks as I go along, and it just kind of feels that much more, just intuitive and artistic, and and I'm not constantly like looking at the IPR and waiting for the IPR to finish rendering, and maybe it's like a little too grainy and it's not really giving me a good idea of what the hell I'm doing, and so on and so forth. Now, as I said, Eevee does have some limitations, and there's some geometry limitations. You're limited in the complexity of the textures that you're working with, and those are all things that you have to kind of like plan ahead before you use Eevee. Now here's the other thing that I do like a lot about Blender, because Blender does not just have Eevee as a render engine, but actually has a proper ray tracing, path tracing type of render engine, which is called Cycles. And all I have to do if I want to see this in Cycles is simply kind of switch this from Eevee to Cycles. And now all of a sudden, my viewport is rendering using the Cycles render engine. You can kind of see that it's obviously like a little bit slower. It's not quite as responsive as it was in Eevee, but at the same time, it's really also giving me a very, very quick kind of feedback. And for instance, let's make this light considerably dimmer. But I can still kind of move around in Cycles, and even though it takes a little bit more time to update, it's still like pretty quick, actually, I should say. Now, I will say that as far as ray tracing, path tracing, render engines, Cycles, at least in my experience, is not the fastest one out there, and I would say the 3D light in Houdini is considerably faster than Cycles. At least on the Mac, I should say, because if you're on the PC, Cycles is currently utilizing a hybrid CPU slash GPU technology using CUDA and optics from NVIDIA, which allows you to basically utilize both your CPU and your GPU to render. So if you happen to have a really powerful NVIDIA GPU, like maybe you have like one of the new 3080 GPUs that just came out, then Cycles can be considerably faster. The nice thing about Cycles is that you do have access to denoising. So right now it's just using like open image denoise. There's this NLM type of denoiser, and the nice thing about it is that it can speed up the render time considerably, because in other render engines where you don't have a denoise, a way to denoise the render, you're having to up your samples considerably, to get rid of all the little noises and grains and all the other things that are kind of undesirable. Where in Cycles, when you have the denoise enabled, you can shrink down like the samples considerably in some cases and still get like a very, very clean image. So, the development pace moves very, very rapidly in Blender, and because it's an open source program, I mean, it's completely free, 100%. And of course, you can have as many copies as possible. I mean, if you have literally like, 5 or 6 computers around the house or in your studio, you can run 5 or 6 different copies of Blender. The pace of development is very, very fast, and in addition to that, it's very, very open, okay? So because it's open source, basically nothing is hidden from the public. So you go on the website, on the Blender website, and you can see exactly what they're working on, what they're planning to working on, what what they're testing, who they're talking to, are they talking to NVIDIA? Do they have like some, relationships with, Epic or with Quixel, and so on and so forth. Everything is shared across the board, and it's really, really nice because, you're not kind of like guessing as to, where the development time is going towards, but, there's an actual sharing of information, so you know exactly what's coming. By the way, one of the things that I really, really love about Eevee, and just, that really, really showcases just how fast it is when it comes to volumetric type of lighting and shadows and so on and so forth. Right now I don't have volumes on, but I mean, let me just kind of enable, I'm just going to put like a little bit of volumes, and you can see this is pretty much instantaneous. And not only that, but it's noise free. I mean, this is huge, because you try to render some clean volumes, you know, fog or you know, like haze or anything of that sort in a path tracing program, and talking about render times skyrocketing way up and everything just taking a lot longer to get like somewhat of a semi-clean render. So the fact that Eevee can do volumetrics instantaneously and noise free is just, I mean, to me, that's just mind-blowing. What else do I like about Blender? I like the fact that there is a lot of third-party add-ons, most of them free. You know, there's a lot of Blender developers, third-party developers that, you know, feel very compelled by, you know, the whole open source kind of mindset. So they create all these really, really cool add-ons for Blender, and they offer them to the public. The other thing that I really, really like about Blender is the fact that there's a lot of tutorials, and Houdini has like a ton of tutorials, but Blender seems to have that many more, just because of the fact that, you know, it's a free program. So that means that a lot more users are out there experimenting with it, and whenever they figure out something cool that they can do with it, they typically share it with the rest of the public. Now, I will, you know, also touch on some of the negatives, some of the things that I'm not particularly crazy about. Some of them are a little bit petty, I guess, but nonetheless, I mean, they all add up into, you know, making a certain smooth workflow or not for someone like myself. So the most obvious example is that it wasn't until fairly recently, I think version 2.8 of Blender, that the way that you would select, you know, the different objects in geometry is, you know, the standard left click on the mouse button, because for the longest time it was right click, and it was just so aggravating. And you had to go into preferences and kind of switch it if you wanted it the other way, but I don't know, it's just like a big turnoff. Another thing is delete. I don't know why, but like hitting the delete, you know, if I select this and I hit delete, it doesn't do anything. I actually have to hit the X to delete, and then I have to confirm it. I don't know why. I don't know why Blender has decided to, you know, not use the delete key and instead use X, but that's just the way it is. A third thing that drives me incredibly nuts, especially after working with Houdini for such a long time, is the fact that the Y direction is actually the depth. So you have X, which is left and right, and then you have Y, which is front and backwards. And then up and down is actually Z, okay? So every time that you want to move something, especially when you first started using Blender, you're going to get confused as hell, because, you know, like you're like, I want to move it in Z, like, you know, further down, and instead it will go up and down, and it's just and unfortunately those things you can't really change. As a Mac user, I also am not crazy about the fact that I can't have my beloved Finder window. So for instance, you know, this is like basically the navigation, you know, your Finder window in Blender, and that's the way it is, as opposed to Houdini, where at least I can tell Houdini that I want to use the native Finder when possible. So, you know, it's, as I said, like some of those things are kind of petty and kind of silly. Some other things that might be a bit of an issue is, you know, if you are wanting to learn a DCC program because you're wanting to, you know, go out and work for a studio, or, you know, or work for like, you know, some other kind of visual effects company, Blender is probably not the best program to learn, because it's still not very used in the professional kind of, you know, film industry and visual effects industry. So, you know, like, I mean, Houdini is by far, by a long shot, much more of a standard. So if you know how to use Houdini and you go out and you put on your resume that you know Houdini and you know, like maybe your specialization is like Houdini destruction or, you know, like, or pyro or this and that, right then and there it gives you an enormous advantage over somebody who only knows Blender. Beyond that, I mean, I just think that Blender has come a long way and that it's very, very difficult to ignore all of the things that Blender brings to the table. I haven't even mentioned yet the fact that in addition to, as I said, you know, having Eevee and, you know, and being able to, you know, to kind of see, you know, what you're working on in real time, Blender has a really incredible camera tracker, and it kind of starts approaching some of the things that you can do in a more specialized camera tracker, such as SynthEyes or PFTrack. The sculpting program, the sculpting portion of Blender is also incredibly powerful. I mean, it's not quite ZBrush, but it's damn close, and it keeps getting better and better. Okay, I think I'm gonna leave it here for this first video about Blender. I mean, there's just so much more. I haven't even touched on the whole, you know, 2D animation features of it, the kind of cell shading. I mean, I haven't touched on, you know, all the different nodes that are available for your textures and shaders and so on and so forth. I mean, there's just like a huge amount of stuff to cover, and, you know, and I'm not gonna like kind of go through all the cool things about Blender, but I will leave you guys with this. DCC, a program and application like Blender or Houdini, are just tools, okay? And you're not getting married to your tool, you're using it. So there is absolutely no rule that says that it has to be either one or the other. And I don't really see why somebody has to choose between using Blender or using Houdini or whatever else you might want to add to your arsenal. The nice thing about Blender being free is the fact that it doesn't add additional costs to your pipeline, so you're not needing to, you know, worry about, oh gee, now I gotta spend some additional money because I gotta license or add another subscription or blah 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 or this and that. I am definitely very committed to continuing using Houdini and using all the amazing tools that come in Houdini, but at the same time I am also very happy to add this other set of very powerful tools to my tool set. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. And yeah, I mean, you know, I encourage you guys to check out Blender. You know, go to blender.org, I think is the website. I'm gonna post it below, and download it, start playing with it, watch a bunch of you know, little tutorials on how to get started in it. And there's an excellent a set of videos by this guy that goes by Blender Guru. His real name is Andrew Price, but Blender Guru sounds cooler. So anyway, on that note, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.